Welcome to the Platinum Freight Podcast with Peter McRae, a podcast for business owners sharing the latest news and tips about customs clearance and freight forwarding. So, welcome to episode 15 of the Platinum Freight Podcast with Peter McRae, Customs Broker. And today we're focusing on importing to New Zealand via general air cargo. So, Peter, let's start with an overview. What is general air cargo and how does it differ from shipments sent via express carriers like DHL or FedEx?
In the previous podcast, we spoke about shipments that travel with express carriers like DHL or FedEx, and those shipments generally are smaller shipments, usually say 20 kilograms or two packages of 20, which would be 40 kilograms. So the difference between the express carriers and general air cargo is that general air cargo usually is cargo that is not time sensitive and doesn't need to be processed and delivered within, say, 3 to 5 days, and that the cargo would be heavier, bulkier, and usually it would cost less to send the goods by general air cargo than it would by an express carrier. But it really all does come down to how urgent does the New Zealand importer need the cargo. And if it is time sensitive, then more than likely, irrespective of the weight of the cargo, the New Zealand importer may decide to send it with an express carrier like DHL or FedEx. But we usually find that it would just travel with a general air cargo on a passenger or a cargo plane. It would travel from overseas, come into one of the international freight terminals in Auckland or Wellington or Christchurch.
How do freight forwarders assist in the process of sending goods and general air cargo from the overseas supplier to New Zealand?
So the overseas supplier will reach out to their freight forwarder in their country, and they'll give the cargo to that freight forwarder. Then that freight forwarder will then make a booking with the airline. The airline will then load the cargo into the passenger or the cargo plane. The cargo will then travel to New Zealand. The cargo will then be unloaded from the aircraft at either Auckland or Wellington or Christchurch air freight terminal. And then once the cargo arrives into the terminal, the importer generally receives one free day of storage before storage will commence. And it's important that New Zealand importers are in contact with their customs broker before the cargo departs from overseas so that the New Zealand customs clearance can be processed and finalized before the cargo arrives.
So, when general air cargo arrives at air cargo terminals in New Zealand, what are the key steps involved in checking the cargo into the warehouse?
So once the cargo comes off the aircraft at one of those three international terminals, the ground handling agents such as Air New Zealand or Menzies Aviation will check the cargo into their warehouse, and the importer will receive either an email or a phone call to say that the cargo has arrived and that the cargo has been checked in. So at that stage, the importer should be aware or should remember that the clock is ticking and each terminal will have different policies, but usually the policy is you get one free day before storage commences. And once the customs clearance has been processed, then the importer can go to the air cargo terminal, to the ground handling agent, whether that's Air New Zealand or Menzies, pay the terminal fees, pay any storage if there is any storage, and then the cargo will then be brought out of the warehouse, and then the importer can take the cargo to their business address or to their home.
Now, why is it crucial for importers to have a customs broker pre clear the cargo before it arrives in New Zealand? And what are the benefits of doing so?
Any importer that wants to import to New Zealand, the first major step in the importing process is that they will need a New Zealand Customs Service importer code, and the importer code will stay with that particular importer throughout their time. So an individual, they only need to have an importer code once. A business will only need to have an importer code which is linked to their NZBN, and every time that they have shipments arrive, they just quote their importer code, and then the shipment gets processed, and then tax gets assessed, and the shipment can then be released and collected or delivered. So it's important that any new person or any new business that plans to import to New Zealand, that they have this importer code created and processed and allocated well in advance before the cargo departs from overseas. The individual or the business can apply for the importer code themselves. They download from the New Zealand Customs Service website a form which is called a NZCS224, and they then submit that to the New Zealand Customs Service, or if the importer is a client of ours, then we would apply for that importer code on their behalf, and then we usually get a quicker response than if an individual or a business was to do it themselves.
And what is the process for customs clearance for goods valued under 1,000 NZD or New Zealand dollars? And why is a customs broker still necessary even if there are no taxes to pay?
Goods that are under 1,000 New Zealand dollars generally don't need to pay any tax, and the importer needs to have the shipment processed through the New Zealand Customs Service. Depending on how low the value of the goods is, the importer may be able to submit a declaration to the New Zealand Customs Service. If the importer is a business, in our opinion, we believe that the business should rely on a customs broker to submit the customs declaration for goods under 1,000 New Zealand dollars, so that the declaration is correct and all declarations for the business have been assessed and are valid, and there are no errors.
And what steps are involved in customs clearance for goods valued over 1,000 New Zealand dollars? And what are the key components of import duty, GST, and the import processing charge?
So if the general air cargo that arrives into one of the three international air cargo terminals, Wellington, Christchurch, or Auckland, if the goods are over 1,000 New Zealand dollars, the importer, whether that's an individual or a business, will need to have a customs broker customs clear the goods. The goods could be levied with import duty. Then the next stage is import GST. And then the third charge is an import processing charge of $81.25. So some goods do have import duty, some goods don't. Most goods will have the import GST, and all of the shipments will have an $81.25 charge levied on the shipment. So it's important that the importer, whether it's the individual or the business, has their New Zealand Customs Service importer code. Either the importer can apply for the import code themselves with the NZCS224, or someone like Platinum Freight can process the application electronically to get the importer code quicker so that the shipment can be processed, the taxes can be assessed, and then the importer can go to the cargo terminal to pick up their goods.
Now, once customs clearance has been completed and any taxes have been paid, what is the process for importers to collect their goods from the airline terminal?
So once we have customs cleared the goods, we would then provide the importer with some paperwork. That paperwork is generally called a delivery order. The importer would print that paperwork, go to the airline terminal, collect the goods, pay any terminal fees, pay any storage charges that may apply, and then collect their goods, and then take their goods, and then the whole process is then considered to be complete, and then we retain a copy of the file, a copy of the import declaration, and all the supporting paperwork in the event that the customs clearance is audited at a later time by the New Zealand Customs Service.
And finally, can you share some tips or best practices for importers to ensure a smooth process when importing goods to New Zealand via general air cargo, and how to avoid some of those common pitfalls?
One of the most important, and I've said it a few times in this podcast, is the importer code. The importer code can take 10 minutes. Sometimes it can take 2 days. So it is important that the importer code has been received before the goods depart from overseas. So, because that is the most important piece of the puzzle. And then the second recommendation or suggestion I would make is that the importer reaches out to their customs broker as soon as they have made a deposit on the goods, so that the customs broker can start to piece the puzzle together to be able to pre-clear the cargo before it arrives into New Zealand. Because at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is to have this cargo customs cleared prior to arrival, and to also avoid any storage charges at the air cargo terminals. And the other suggestion is, if the goods are high value and if they are traveling as general air cargo, it's important to make sure that the overseas supplier has insured the goods for its journey to New Zealand. And if the overseas supplier hasn't insured the cargo, then it's important that the New Zealand importer has arranged insurance at their end before the goods depart from overseas to New Zealand.
Thanks for sharing your insights and tips, Peter. Now, to learn more about customs clearance and freight management services, visit platinumfreight.co.nz.